Got it. Cool. Well, it's lovely to see you all. Thanks for coming and sticking through with the whole thing as well. It's lovely to see everyone again and all the same faces. And yeah, today it should be kind of cruisy today, but in that we're just learning what I think is quite a cool tool, and one that I certainly use a lot, and my students increasingly use quite a bit. And if you're invested in R and the R ecosystem, it's a great one to just know how to use anyway, which is R Markdown. So we'll just have a bit of an intro. What is it? What's R? What's Markdown? How do the two things play together? And how can we use it to, improve our lives and make the world a better place? So that's the goal. It's kind of the final step in our little journey towards increasingly reproducible science. This is the final part. So this is sort of understanding how we can weave all those tools that we've learned and all those skills that we've learned into living reproducible documents at the end, because ultimately we need to present the results of our work, of course, and communicate it. We can do that through the written word or through books or websites or slides or all sorts of things. And R Markdown can help us do that in a way such that it tracks what we've done and maintains that chain of reproducibility. So that's basically it. We'll be learning the basics, why we might be interested in using it, and actually just getting hands-on and trying to make make ourselves a bit of a template for a couple of use cases going forward. Here's a little journey that we've been on. Came down here, popped through transforming and visualizing our data, and now we're learning how to sort of weave this all into something that we might share with others in the wider world. Again, the goal, as it has been throughout, or one of the goals, is this idea of reproducibility. But now we're at the stage where we need to communicate our results, the results of our work. And so for that, we need some kind of a document format that can handle the basic needs of reproducing our work. And what that might look like is something which can integrate text and figures and code. It might also be something that is kind of living, in a sense, that it can be continuously edited and updated as new data, new code comes through the pipeline. And importantly, something that preserves that chain of modification, and so maps inputs to outputs. So when we have our raw data up one end and we use code to manipulate it, because we're not fiddling with raw data in Excel anymore, we're just using code to manipulate these things and wrangle it. But we want to be able to preserve that chain of modification right through to like the individual numbers that you report in your scientific paper in the end. My R squared was this. Well, where does that come from? Is it just copied and pasted from somewhere over here, and who knows, and then you mangled the data at some point? Now we need to be able to, ideally, we want to be able to map that to a specific chain of modification, to a specific data set, particular test, all the way through, and how we've updated these things through the life cycle of our analyses. And so that's what would be nice in such a document format, which R Markdown does give us. And just briefly, by way of use cases as to many things that we might be interested in using this for, is that certainly one of them I use it all the time for, and students do as well, as we'll see, it can be quite useful just as like a kind of a notebook, a living notebook sort of thing. So when you're crunching data, there's often a lot of wrangling going on, and you're creating some plots, start getting a feel for it. Maybe you're running and refining some models or whatever. There's a lot of that early stages of just messing around with things and kind of thinking out loud. R Markdown can be great for that, because you've just got the code all embedded there, and you can spit out results, and you can integrate text. And so you can kind of just create a bit of a notebook without having to save things and copy and paste it. And then collaborators don't know exactly what's been run here or there, but students send me a little notebook, a little R Markdown document, a little PDF, just has a bit of code. I can see, oh yeah, so they ran this model, compared the AOCs with this, whatever. Here's a couple of diagnostic plots, and they, so it's a nice way of just roughly sort of thinking out loud, which is a very common use case. You can just write whole papers with it. So I do, that's a slightly more advanced. It's totally doable. So I write the papers that I'm leading, I write in R Markdown first. Inevitably, they have to end up as like a Word document at some point. So R Markdown can spit out Word, because journals, are stuck in whatever century they happen to be in, but also just because collaborators, not everyone's working in the same universe. So inevitably, at some point, it gets converted into a Word document, but that's fine. But you can totally write scientific papers with it. And the benefits are all those things that we've talked about, that you know exactly where all those little numbers came from. And when you have to, delete some outlier or whatever, you don't have to then update every figure and table. You just rebuild the thing and it's all nice and done, and you still know exactly where it all came from. Same deal, technical documents or reports, if you're not, doing for consulting, or you're just, not in academia writing peer review publications per se. They just produce really lovely, well-formatted documents. So I'm like, you can get there in Word, of course, but I find that just by default, the kind of PDFs and technical documents that R Markdown spits out is just nice right off the bat. And you can get them into all sorts of different forms by tweaking them. But it can do all sorts of things as well. Like you can write whole books now. There's packages for that, chaptered books that just bind together easily. All of these slides that I've been using for the last 4 weeks are all written in R Markdown. Websites, my personal website is just written in R Markdown. So you can do all sorts of stuff. So it's a very, very flexible, once you learn, this little tool, it can be the outputs from very few inputs are really radically diverse. And that's by design. That's kind of part of the whole point, which we'll get into. So what is it in a general sense? Here's the technical sort of definition. It's just a document format. And it's a way to create reproducible documents that weave together text and code to produce really pretty outputs. So publishable sort of output formats, which you then, of course, need to like mangle into a Word document and then send to the journal so that they can kind of mangle it into uglify it into their format or whatnot. But that's basically it. So it creates nice reproducible documents that can get to weave together code and text and the products of code to produce nice things. So the general workflow kind of looks like this. We know what R is, so we can kind of skip that step a little bit. We've been using R, that's just standard R, and we'll come to integrate some of our R code in these documents, but it's just exactly what we've been doing the whole time. So R Markdown documents understand R as long as we tell it this is code, and I'll show you how to do that. But it also combines the power of what's called Markdown, and we'll spend a little bit of time introducing what Markdown is, into this format called R Markdown, which is just the unification of these two things. And then from that, you can, as I said, you can spawn all sorts of things. So slides like these, the most common things are like a PDF or a document of some kind. So PDFs or a Word document even, or an HTML, which is just like this, which is something that's read by a browser. So those would be the most common, but you can create slides, you can create entire websites, with little packages handling all the complex stuff on the back end. So from one sort of basic input, you can spawn a lot of outputs, and you can do multiple. So you can create from one R Markdown document, you can say, you spit that out into a PDF, HTML, and a Word document for me, just because I want them all. Or I want to share that one with the person that uses Word and this one with someone that prefers PDFs. You can just spit them all out as part of your workflow. So the structure of an R Markdown document, which we will start to build shortly, there are 3 bits to it, and we'll step through each of these. So first of all, an R Markdown document, you can tell them what they are because they've got this is a little file extension that you might see, RMD, R Markdown. So normally with our R files, just pure code, it's just R. And a Markdown file would just be .md, and you might come across those in the wild somewhere because Markdown is its own thing. But R Markdown are these .rmd files. And they're built of 3 things. They've got some jargon, which I'll tell you about, but it doesn't matter so much. But there's a little bit up top called the front matter, and that defines really basic global features of our document, like what do you want it to be output as, a PDF, a Word document, or a website, or whatever. So there's some big global options that we set up top, and that's in this little part of the document called the front matter that we'll have a look at. There's just like the bulk of the document itself, so the Markdown content. And this is all the text. So, here are my methods, or here's what I'm thinking. That's just the pure text. And then there's the code as well. That's kind of where the power of R Markdown and the synergy comes in here, is in the weaving of these 2 things together. So we can use words and just regular old Markdown to write stuff. And then we can embed code within those documents. And the format is clever enough to know that We want to actually execute that code and either output the code itself in the final document or the products of that code or both in the document. So you can write things and then run some code and embed the little plot and then write some more stuff and then run a statistical analysis and embed those results. So that's really where the synergy comes in here. And so we'll step through each of these to get a bit of understanding of what the heck these actually look like. We'll start with Markdown because that might be the most foreign. We kind of know what R looks like, so we'll be able to get a hang of that. This is pretty brief, but Markdown might be the most sort of foreign, the newest concept if you aren't familiar with it. So Markdown is, in the jargon, it's called a plain text markup language. It's just a way of writing stuff. It's just a way of writing things. But the computer language jargon for it would be plain text markup language. So it is it's just a plain text file. So like we've been using text, it's just another kind of text, like CSVs or .txt. It's just a kind of text. And markup language contrast, maybe it's easiest to understand in contrast to what it isn't. So it's you would contrast it most naturally with something like Microsoft Word. And Microsoft Word in the jargon, again, is called a what you see is what you get editor. And that's literally the awful acronym that they use for these things. So the way Word works is as we all know, you've got your document on the screen and you put the content in there. So you're typing stuff up, but you also manipulate how it looks directly on the page. You make things bigger and smaller and bolder and change fonts. And then the thing that you're looking at on the screen is what prints out on the other end. So it combines what you see is what you get editors, as the name suggests. You kind of arrange things on the page and that's what you get when you send it off or you save that file or you print it out or whatever. The way these markup languages works and Markdown works is quite different. So it actually separates the content of your file from the presentation of that file. So the content is in all the words that are on the page and everything, all your headings and everything like that. It separates that out from how it ultimately looks. So what format it's put out in, what kind of fancy fonts you use, what the headings look like, all of that stuff, it's split. And that's kind of it's an older way of doing things in the sense that it's kind of how computers used to do things right from the get-go. But and it can be a bit foreign if we're, again, a bit odd if we're really used to this Word where we fiddle things on the page and try and drag those stupid graphs and get them to sit in the right spot. And then they jump around when we introduce a new table or whatever. But so it's kind of a different way of thinking, but it's got real benefits in that one of the big ones being that the same content can produce multiple different kinds of formats and outputs and presentations. With really just the tweaking of like a couple of little options, global options as to how this thing should look. As I said, split out some slides or PDFs or Word documents or whatever, or change the entire template for how this thing should look. Do I want it for this like a technical document or a scientific paper or whatever? You can make big global changes to the appearance of your final document without by separating out the manipulation of its presentation from its content. So that's what this kind of markup language part of it means. But the long and the short of it is that writing Markdown, it's just text. You're just putting words on a page, and then there are a couple of little tricks that we can learn for doing some basic manipulations of how these things appear, of how the final content appears in terms of like, how do we make something bold, or how do we italicize this little word? So there's kind of small local changes that we might like to make in the appearance of our text on the final page. We just do that. We just need to learn a couple of fancy little characters, a couple of little tricks, so that we can like create a list or italicize or bold something. But then all those big changes we do elsewhere in that header, and mostly the computer handles that. So when I'm talking about learning Markdown, that's what we need to do. Just memorize, or over time, there's like a handful of things that we can remember to help us get some of those basic changes on the page. But realistically, there's like 3 or 4 of them that you'll use regularly, and the others are, more complex things we can look up if we need them. There's like a handful of things. It'll take us a couple of minutes to get the vibe of it, and it's easiest if we just kind of dive right in, which we will in a tick. But I'll show you on slides first, and then we'll actually just get into an editor, an online editor, and start typing around. So here on the left is an example of Markdown. So that's the stuff you're actually writing in. And then when you push the button, or in our studio, we just get it to render our documents in whatever format we like in the end. It looks like this on the end. So this is a handful of different things going on the left here, and ultimately it renders to something that looks quite nice, much nicer than this actually, but this is just for the slides. On the right-hand side here. So we've got a few things here, like this little hash turns things into headings. So that's been interpreted correctly as something nice and big and bold as a heading. We just have some regular old text here. And then we've got a list. And in that list, we've got, you define a list by, for example, by using these little asterisks. And within that, we've also got some italicized text and some bold text. And look, those are probably like the 4 little fancy bits of formatting that we might like to learn, and we'll step through them one by one. But that's just to give the initial feeling of what I mean. When you're actually writing in Markdown, it looks like that. And then it spits out something much prettier and much more flexible on the other end. So a few things we might like to do, and that we often do in our documents, are things like make a heading, introduction, methods, results, discussion. To define headings, when you're using Markdown, we just use different numbers of these little hashes. 1 is the largest heading, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is basically just a bold bit of text. So that's one of our tricks. We just use a little hash if we want to define a new big old heading, and add more and more if you want that heading to be sort of a lower and lower level. But really, like sort of 1 and 2 is kind of all we tend to use. Things like introduction, or maybe there's a subheading, for our statistical methods or something in the methods. So that's our little header button. A couple of other tricks, we can do things like make bold text. And for that, you just surround it with 2, where you can either use underscores or asterisks. I just, for the sake of it, I just use asterisks. But so 2 of them will make a bit of text bold. So this in Markdown will be rendered to this in your final PDF. So this becomes this. Or if you just put 1 on either side, it becomes italicized. So this will ultimately be rendered as this, italics. We can do things like superscript or subscript, but ultimately, so superscript, for example, is just 2 little arrows on either side. That's how we do, R squared. You put 2 little arrows either side of the 2, and that would be shut up as superscript. And we can make blank new lines, which we can get into, but that's just one that we might want to remember. In that, to separate paragraphs and things, just leave a blank line between paragraphs, and it'll be rendered as a whole new paragraph on the final document there. You can put 2 spaces at the end of a line. And this might make a bit more sense when we get hands-on, but those are a few tricks. I've got the cheat sheet, I think, for us, because there will be, where did I put it? Again, here we go. So syntax, these are just a couple of little things. So when you're stuck and you're like, oh, actually, I've forgotten how to make a list again, you can just have a look here and it'll tell you, just look on the left-hand side and it'll show you how it'll appear on the right-hand side. So, okay, that's how I make a list. Great. How do I make things bold again? There we go. So bold here, or bold, right, will appear as bold or bold. Great. And that's like the entirety of these magical rules here. Those are the only things we'll really need to do, because all of the big stuff in terms of how the document ultimately looks, we fiddle with elsewhere. But these are these little tricks that we're learning at the moment.
Tom, can I ask how you do color?
Color is something, that's a good question. You won't do that locally, you'll do that. Why would we want to change you could change the color of text, I suppose.
You've got a nice red heading there on your slide.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, okay, so I did. That's a global option. Okay. And so I've defined there, so you can do things like, and like here. So there would be a global option. So I said, for this, I've got another little option buried somewhere that says every time, just for every bold bit of text in my document, make it red, or make it specifically, you get to use like the hex code. But so that's what I mean by separating those big things. So here, that's something you would specify elsewhere. And then you would say, well, every time I italicize something, make it green or whatever. And we could do that kind of stuff for our final documents as well. Yeah, those big, that would be one of my global options that I've fiddled with somewhere and I couldn't find. But I did it once ages ago and forgot. But yeah. Good question. That's not like a local thing that you would bother with, really. Stepping through a couple more of these, so we can make lists. You just use an asterisk. So you put you start your list. Might have some text. There are 3 things I wanted to achieve here, and then you can leave a blank line. And then as long as you put asterisks, blah blah blah, 0.1, another one, 0.2. It'll spit out as this on this side, or if you want a numbered list, you can do the same. You just put a number and then a space and then your item, number 2, space and item. Actually, I think it even just does the numbering automatically, so you can do like 1, 1, 1 or whatever you like. As long as there's a 1 at the beginning, it'll number that list for you. So sometimes we like to make lists. That's how we do it in R Markdown. And that's also our cheat sheet. So that's how we do it in Markdown, full stop. This isn't just R Markdown, this is Markdown, which is a well-defined thing. If we want to link to stuff, like put in a hyperlink to a website like I've got here, we need to use this combination of little hard brackets and then soft brackets. So the thing in the hard bracket is the word that's actually displayed with the bit of highlighting. So the word link here. And then the actual thing, the document, the website, the other place that I want to redirect to, is placed in the soft brackets here. So git.com. So if I clicked that link button, because it's highlighted, that word, it'll just shoot up and straight redirect me to another website. So that's how we do links, and that can be mostly to websites like hyperlinks, but we can also link to documents and things in other contexts. Equations can get a little complex, but they look really, really nice. So they are. I don't know if you may have also heard of Latex, which is also, it's like a much more complex version of R Markdown. It's kind of older but more complex, but it's very, very powerful, and it's used very widely in disciplines like maths, maths, physics, where they use a lot of equations and stuff. Because Word is just a pain in the butt for really getting nice equations and whatnot. So to do it, it's a little tricky just when it comes time and you've got some sweet equations that you need to embed in your document. You may just need to look up how like LaTeX equations and do a little refresher there. But the key thing for us is that we surround them by these little dollar symbols. And then we just need to, there's a little bit of special formatting, but it's all based in this LaTeX format for actually getting things like squared and MC and whatnot. But for our purposes, when we're defining an equation, we need to put them in dollar signs and then pop our equation in the middle there. And if you want to do some fancy things like divided by the other, or fractions or whatever, then we can go through, and there might even be a cheat sheet. It might even be part of this, I'm not sure. But we need to take a quick sidestep into LaTeX just to figure out. Don't think so, but there's a couple of other rules that we can learn there. But the dollar signs are the main thing, and it looks really lovely. You can get big, complex equations, and they just get handled and rendered nicely, and so you don't need to fiddle with them too badly. And images, which is something that we might like to do. So if we're not, one thing we'll do when we're creating our Markdown documents is just use code to create the image, which is fine. Like we could just call our ggplot, and then it'll plonk a nice plot right in the middle of it. Sometimes you might also like to bring in an image from somewhere else. You've got a file on your computer and that needs to go in the document. And this is how you would do it. So you can actually do it from a website as well. You can pull in things and embed them in your document, or if you just got more commonly a file sitting on your computer. Just a funny little bit of syntax here. It looks very similar to creating our hyperlinks there. So we've got these hard brackets and soft brackets, hard brackets, soft brackets. But in the soft brackets here, we just need to like specify the file name and where it is sitting on our computer. And it starts with an exclamation point, and I have no explanation for why that is. It just is. So it's like, here's my image, and then it'll plonk that straight into our little, it'll find this one that's in your soft brackets, and it'll plonk it straight into our document there. Can do all sorts of things like creating, manipulating the size of it and placement where it's aligned and all that kind of stuff. But that's one pretty straightforward way to do it. There is more than one way to do it. That's the Markdown way to do it. But actually, R Markdown, I think, has some other ways as well, which I've used before and I can look up. But that's a very standard one, and we will do that in a moment. Okay, so there's a lot to take in there, but the easiest way, I think, to crack on is just to, there's a cool website that I found. Actually, there's a bunch of them. And it allows us to see in real time, here we go. So it's in your exercises. It's called Markdownlivepreview.com. And it gives us on the left here, like a whole bunch of example Markdown. And this is a text editor that we can just edit and do stuff. And then on the right gives us the rendered version. So we can just use this to practice our, oh wow. We can use this to practice our little tricks, like how do I put a heading in? How do I make text bold? How do I create a list? And it's got a big, like it's got everything here. It's got a bunch of examples and even tables and whatnot. You can see how they're rendered here. So yeah, we can just take 5 minutes, mess around, try and, have a look at your little cheat sheet here. So try and, make a heading, make some bold text, create a link. I think for the exercise, I think what we can try to work toward today is maybe even building ourselves up a little, like the start of a scientific paper sort of template for ourselves. So you could start here, you could delete all this and just make like, put in, a title and then your main, introduction, methods, kind of start to sort of try and use Markdown to create a bit of a rough paper format. And then we'll carry that through to our next couple of chunks of learning and start to embed some code in there and all that kind of stuff. So let's just have a little mess around with that. And any questions, just ask as we go, of course.
Tom, I have a question for use cases of Markdown, or R Markdown. You didn't have it in your list early on, and that is when you're just doing whatever analysis you need to do for your data. Is that something you would typically do in R Markdown or just in R or RStudio?
Yeah, I tend to use, it's a good question. I tend to just use R. We'll get on a little bit later. I can show you how to use both kind of in combination, which is fun. But for me, yeah, and when I'm publishing my little data set with my papers, it's all just R. It's just plain R. But when I'm writing these papers, it'll actually be a combination of both. So I'll have my analyses and all my data wrangling and tidying and whatnot. They'll be in R, just straight up little R files on my computer. I'll have the document, like the paper itself, will be an R Markdown file, because that's where I write all the stuff, introduction, methods, results. But it will call upon those R scripts to steal all that information and all my R squared values and statistical results and stuff. So ultimately, I would have both. But yeah, the bulk of my hard work lives in just R, unless I'm sharing it with the world in one way, either through a publication or if it's something simple and I'm just sharing an idea with someone, then it might just all be in a big R Markdown thing. Like, I'll load the data, wrangle the data, here's an analysis, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's both. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to add a comment, just that my personal, what I usually do is that I end up using R Markdown mainly because as a PhD student, I want to be sharing my stuff with my supervisors. And I find it that it becomes so much easier and cleaner, and then you can make the little chunks and everything is like organized. And then whenever you run and knit the R Markdown that I'm sure Tom will talk about later, it just looks like a good thing, and then they can see the title, they can click in exactly where they want to go and what questions. So I usually do directly on R Markdown, and I don't find it harder than just using R. So if it's something that like you want to use with R Markdown, I think you would, I find it even easier because of the chunks and everything separated, that I can just use R Markdown to do my, there are a couple of things that I found that sometimes might not work as well in R Markdown, but it's very rare that that happens. But yeah, that's my perspective, I guess.
Yeah, thanks. I've dabbled with R Markdown a little bit a while ago, and I am more used to working just within R for analyses, and there were just some things that weren't working the same, and it frustrated me, so I just left R Markdown. Like alone, for example, where plots appear and being able to export things really quickly and easily from your R rather than from R Markdown. Yeah, so I was kind of frustrated, and I was wondering what your workflows look like. So
yeah, no, it's a good question. I agree with you there. So yeah, mostly R for me, and then it's just when I want to present things, I do R Markdown. I'm just trying to find an example. What have been? While you're chipping away in the background there, I'll show you a current. What's the name of the thing that I'm doing, and then
I recently learned that you can call the R file into R Markdown, so you don't have to have all those codes in your R Markdown. It makes it neater. But on the other hand, I was thinking, because if I want to share my code, publish it in a website so people can come and check. But if I call another R file, not directly in R Markdown, those codes in that R file will be masks, and you can't see that.
yes, I see your point. Yeah. Like all the showing you're working in that other file will be hidden from the current one. Yeah, that's a fair point. In which case, yeah, I guess it depends on the use case. So I've cases where I've just purely used R Markdown, or I've seen it used very effectively, would be things like supplementary materials. But yeah, in that case, you tend to want to show you're working as you're going along so that people can follow and see what models you've run and whatnot, in which case, yeah, splitting it off doesn't work so well, because you're right, it'll hide what's going on in the background there. There are ways in the final document to hide the code and do all sorts of fancy things. I was just poking around at some supplementary materials recently. Yeah, that is a trade-off, but that's exactly my workflow. So everything gets offloaded. All the big stuff is split up into scripts, and I just pull the final product into the document. But yeah, if you want to show you're working, then you're right that it does need to be in the document itself. And I'm just, for the life of me, I can't remember what the name of that thing I'm currently working on is. I'll show you what we can work towards. Oh, that's it. Okay. Oops. So what have we got here? So I've got this is one I'm working on at the moment. So I've got I've got two little scripts. One that just does a bunch of I'll open them up for you. One that does a bunch of preparation stuff. I haven't even run it on this computer, so it loads some libraries and it does a bunch of wrangling, and it's for a little meta-analysis. So this like calculates a bunch of effect sizes and throws out bad stuff that we don't need anymore and all that kind of whatnot. So it's just your basic wrangling. And then I've got like another little file here that does the actual analyses. Again, these are both just plain R files. And there's that, which I've got later on in these slides today, which we can learn a bit about, is this source function. So I've daisy chained these together. So every time I run this analysis, it actually runs the whole preparation step over again, because it's not too heavy, so I might as well. So it actually just re-cleans it. So if anything happens and I change and the raw data get tweaked or whatever, it runs from fresh each time. But this is my analysis script, and so there's a bunch of, and there's actually arguably too much in here as well. I should probably split out the plots because they're taking up a lot of space. But these are all my models and number crunching and whatnot. So those are those two. And then I've got in my document, I've got my main manuscript is an R Markdown file. So that's the main manuscript. And I don't write in RStudio because it's very ugly and annoying. So I like Sublime Text. So I can open it with that, although just let me open it in whatever I want. So it's a bit ugly. I can open it in, because I don't actually write on this computer. I've got it, but if we have a look at it anyway, you know, this is what this is a little R Markdown file. It looks kind of wonky, but once we start getting down, you know, there's an introduction that I haven't bothered writing yet, and a bunch of methods that are coming through there, and then some results, you know, and a discussion that doesn't exist, and a few plots at the back end. And within this R Markdown file, I actually call the analysis file. So again, we're getting that daisy chain. So every time I build this little document, it reruns every one of my analyses, and that reruns the whole preparation for all my data. So it's completely preserved and linked all the way through. And then the final little output is just a nice kind of looking PDF. You know, there's a title page, and there's an abstract that doesn't exist, and an introduction that doesn't exist, and methods and whatnot, but it's all nicely formatted.
I didn't know that you can write in a plain text. Like
For sure, yeah. Yeah, so you can write in whatever you want, because it is, like we said, it's a text file. So I would definitely recommend, there are a whole bunch out there. And like RStudio, this isn't a very nice environment to write a manuscript in. RStudio, I find it's just not very nice.
Yeah, so I was wondering how people write that in RStudio.
Yeah.
I didn't know there is a better way of doing that.
It's a bit fiddly and ugly, but yeah, Sublime Text I just find quite nice. It's free. It's open source, and it's really customizable. Like you can change, you know, the width of these things and how they all look. But so ultimately, when I'm writing a paper, I'm sitting in here, like in RStudio, in Sublime Text. Actually, normally it looks a bit nicer than this because I use it on my laptop where I've actually got highlighting set up and a few different things. But yeah, so just look like this. You're writing a paper. There's my statistical instruction, you know, details and all that kind of stuff. And then when it comes time to build it, you can build it however you want. There's a few ways to do it. I've got it automated, but yeah, you can open it up and just hit knit if you want, and that'll rebuild the whole thing, or whatever. But yeah, it's just a plain text document, so you can edit it in any text editor of your choice. They're even nice. Well, if you're into it, and you kind of want to cheat a little bit in terms of separating content from appearance, you could use, there are programs out there like Typora, I think, and there's a few others that kind of render Markdown on the fly. So you kind of get what you see is what you get feeling, whilst not actually, so you kind of cheat your way around the fact that Markdown separates content from.
It looks useful.
So there, yeah, and that can maybe ease the transition if you like those kind of things as well. So it's basically kind of like using something like this, where as you're writing, you see it appear. Typora is one of them. There are a bunch of free ones as well, but so that might be for you. Yeah, whatever. But I would just use my favorite text editor, which happens to be this one.
I don't know if you're going to get to it later, Tom, but and if you are, please don't answer it now, but yeah. Are you going to touch on how to do referencing in Markdown?
Yeah, we will. That's up the back end. We will talk about a little bit about Bibtex, and how to do that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And how to use, we'll go through some tips on how I like to pair it with. It should work nicely with any reference manager, but I like to use Zotero if anyone is looking for a reference manager that isn't too awful, although they're all kind of awful in their own special way. But I got fed up with EndNote and all those things, and so Zotero is the one I've settled on, and I'd be happy to chat about that a bit. But yeah, we'll touch on referencing for sure. Yeah, and then you can get, because it works and then you get all your references down at the end here and some fancy figures and whatnot. And tables, like that whole table there is just programmatically generated, all those numbers. I haven't typed in any of that stuff. I've just said, I've run the tests in a script somewhere and then said, we'll slot them in here, 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 here. And so it does that. And if I had to throw out some data because it turned out to be wrong and wonkies, and then it just, reruns it and repopulates it all. So it's all good. Same with the plots, these are all just automatically done. So I had to throw out some data and they just get regenerated and slotted back in. So it's kind of cool. It's not like it's fiddly, you know, there's a learning curve to all of this stuff. So this, you know, going to writing a full paper in it it takes time and effort, no question there. So I'm not suggesting it's like a super easy thing, but I think it's worthwhile. I think it's a cool skill to have. And I think it just looks prettier. I get really obsessive with this stuff. So I like it all to look nice. And I find this workflow creates some really pretty looking documents.
One last question, Tom. What's the font? In the file you just showed us, what font is that?
I don't know, it's the default font.
Default?
So I'd have to have a look. Yeah, good question.
Okay. Thank you. I've always seen that and really liked it as well. So.
That's a good question, actually. I don't even, yeah, they just have nice defaults. We could change the font if we wanted to, but I would have to just Google what actual font family it is. Yours should look similar to this, I think. I don't think I've manipulated the font.
I have another question about writing it in R. How do you receive your co-authors' comments?
Yeah, that's a good question. So two answers would be, or two workflows that I would use. One is if we're all on like the same page and we're all into this kind of stuff. I'd use Git and Github. So I don't know if you've heard of GitHub, but without, you know, that's a whole workshop, which maybe we could put on the list for next year. So Git and GitHub are ways of like sharing code and data, and there's systems for tracking versions of things. So it's a system of version control, and you can collaborate with people. So it's like, I'll write a chunk of an introduction and I'll push it up there, and then they'll pull it down. They might change some things and make some comments, and they'll push it up. And it all gets tracked in this fancy little world of Git and GitHub, and we can go into that. So that's one way. The other way is just a bit more old school, I guess. I either send them a PDF and they comment on the PDF, or I send them a Word document and they track changes, and I have it side by side and I manually integrate it back in. Those would be that's kind of just the archaic sort of way of doing it, but I find it's not too bad actually, rather than just going through and, you know, hitting accept all like I maybe used to do. Having to manually copy people's changes back in helps me reflect on them a little bit and understand. But generally, yeah, I'm kind of at this stage. I find most of my collaborations, and they tend to be more commenty based rather than everyone really doing a lot of heavy text editing. So in which case you can comment on PDFs or Word documents, and I think about it and cool, make those changes. Yeah, so that would be my clumsy solution. It ends up as a PDF or a Word doc somewhere. So we're having a bit of a mess around here. We've got things like our headings. It's cool. Quotes, don't use them very often, but you might. Tables are fiddly. I would ignore this little example of a table. You're never really going to write it that way. There are R packages that can help us make tables. And they're a little bit fiddly too, but you're never going to do this. So I would disregard this. You're not going to try and line up those little dashes. And tables are historically a weak point in Markdown. They've been a pain in the ass to do. They're still a little bit painful, but there are packages that make it easier now. So you can once you've just got a nice little bit of, you know, statistical output or whatever that's arranged in a data frame, you can send it to a little R package that turns it into a table. You know, that's what I've done with like these, for example. There's no way I'm lining up little dots and dashes and whatever and trying to get this into a thing. I just ran some stats and created a data frame with this information in it and then said, make that a pretty table. And you can do it that way as well. So I'd say ignore the tables. What else is good here though? Yeah, quotes are good. They've embedded a little image from a website. Code blocks, which we can get into, and inline code as well, but that's for highlighting. Yeah, we'll get into some of those in a tick. That's the big stuff. That's Markdown. All right. Serious. So I'll start to creep onward, but by all means, we'll keep messing around there, or just yell if I'm going too quickly or anything like that. But we'll be implementing this as we go. So we'll be making some headings and creating some bold text and knitting documents and that kind of thing. So we'll be internalizing some of this as we go. So that was a brief intro to Markdown itself, and it was brief but comprehensive because Markdown isn't that, in principle, isn't that complicated. A lot of the hard work is just offloaded, and we never have to worry about it. And of that which we do have to worry, it's relatively simple handful of rules, and Google is always there to help us constantly. So now we can up our game a little bit and start to get into some of those benefits of R Markdown. So we've had Markdown, now we're looking at R Markdown. Big difference being that now we can weave in our lovely R code or the products of that code into our documents ourselves. So that's what this little next step does. So there are a couple of ways to do it. We have our little R Markdown document. Now we know how to write words on the page and make a heading and italicize some stuff. How do we get our lovely code or the products of that code in there? There's two ways to do it, and two you'll come across. So one is through the use of these things called chunks, code chunks. In an R Markdown document, which will open up in a tick, it begins and ends with a specific little bit of formatting, and it looks like this. So 3 little backticks, and then the squiggly ones, and then the R, and then 3 little backticks. And so by chunk, it means, that's what we're talking about. So there's this little start and finish bit, and then we put all our code in here in between, and that can be as much or as little as we like. And it's just plain old straight up R code. So like we've been writing this whole time, it's like load up my data, read.csv, wrangle it, do whatever you like. It's just straight up R code. You can comment that code as well. So like you can use a little hash and comment the code as we would. And what this does is that it just means that our R Markdown document, because it's not quite clever enough to know right off the bat what's code and what's text. So by wrapping our code in these little magical things, and again, we'll just use the shortcut, so you don't actually have to type these things every time. There's a create chunk shortcut. So as long as we plonk our code inside there, it'll know that it'll say, all right, this is just words on the page, and then, okay, here's a chunk of code. I need to execute that and treat it like R code and do what you're telling me to do in code there. So that's what a code chunk is. It looks like, here's a little chunk here. So 3 little dots and then a squiggly thing. And then actually doing that. And then R, I've got a bit of R code here. And then 3 little dots to finish that chunk. And if you're using RStudio, it even shades it differently so you can see what's going on. And I think I always forget a shortcut for it. Nope, that wasn't it. Oops, that definitely wasn't it. Let me, unless anyone in the chat happens to beat me to it, or my keyboard shortcuts. Create chunk. It'll be called create insert chunk. There it is. All right, so that's it for Mac. I need to decrypt. So it's Alt, Option Command I on Mac. So Option Command I should do it. Option Command I. Yeah, there we go. And that creates a little chunk. Windows will be something different. And then we write our code in the middle here. My code. And then it closes there. So it'll know, so like, for example, here's a bunch of just text. So it'll, because again, when we're compiling these things, R always reads like humans do from top to bottom. So it goes, oh, okay, here's a bunch of text, and then bang, all right, actually contained within this chunk is some code. So I need to execute that like I would R code. So that's a chunk. Okay, here's another example. So here's, say, we've got a little chunk, and if we just guess at what this is doing and have a bit of a look, you're simulating some data, and you're from 2 groups, and then you're running a t-test between these 2 fake bits of data. And then when I embed that in a document and actually run it, it looks like this. So my final PDF will have this in it. And it'll be the actual code itself. It'll echo, it'll repeat the code that I've typed in, but it'll also embed the product of that code. So t-test, just like you would when you run it interactively, except it actually embeds that thing in the PDF or the Word document or whatever. And so it spits it all out, slots the results right in there for us. We may or may not want all that. We have full control over whether or not we want to see the code or the results or none of it, and we'll get to that in a sec. But just at its very simplest, if I put this chunk in my little R Markdown document, it'll spit out like this. We can do the same with plots. So if we want a nice plot straight into our document there, we can run a, build our little ggplot just like we would. We'll pop that in its own little chunk. And then that would be embedded in our final output document there. So the code itself would be embedded, and then the product of that code would also be embedded, which is this little plot that we've called on here, miles per gallon as a function of horsepower or whatever it is. So we've slotted in a nice plot right there, and we can see exactly where it's come from, what data it's using, anything we've done to that data, what the X and Y are, all that kind of stuff. The other way, there's two ways to embed code. The other fancy way to do it is just inline. So that's just for very little short snippets of code, for little bits where we want to include, say, a particular number or something like that. So where we want to include a little snippet of code, but it's automatically replaced in this case with the product of that code. So it's for all those kinds of cases where you want to slot in like, my sample size was blah. So instead of, just something very simple where you want to say, plunk in the results of a bit of code, and we can do that inline, and that looks like this. So instead of our 3 ticks and then the squiggly bits and the R and whatnot, you just have one backtick, the letter R, because this is a bit of R code, and you need to close it out with a backtick as well. And then our R Markdown document will know that, oh, okay, so that's a bit of R code, and I just want to execute that and replace it with whatever is actually in there. So in this example, here I've got my little backtick R, so that's definitely a bit of inline code. What this is doing is it's rounding pi to 2 decimal places. So when I put that exact bit of code in my R Markdown document, it'll just spit out 3.14, pi to 2 decimal places. And the use case for this kind of thing, often in our sort of purpose, is exactly what I was kind of saying. When you're writing documents, there's often cases where we need to quote numbers or specific results or what have you, R squared values, sample sizes, whatever. So you don't want to like break a sentence and put a whole chunk in there just to spit out the sample size of 3 or whatever. So we can use inline code to do that. So it's a kind of a cool trick where you get something like this. So you have, this is the R Markdown version. So white blah, blah suggests that pi is equal to whatever. This is the bit of code though that actually executes the thing that I'm interested in slotting in there. And then in the final PDF, you get this, right? So instead of having to manually type in my sample size or R squared value and update it manually and remember every time something changes, put in the bit of code. So it's all done programmatically and automatically, and I can trace exactly where that comes from. And it's just swapped out in the final text for the product of that code. So it's a very handy little trick. Like I say, and it's kind of often useful for those complex results sections where we're quoting numbers and whatnot. And we can just pull little bits of our results in there, slot them right in, and then they're automatically updated and alive, if that makes sense. Yeah, good point, Laura, as with shortcuts as well. You can always customize shortcuts, and sometimes in Windows they are a bit squiffy. They have so many shortcuts that they often overwrite system shortcuts and things. It's a bit painful. But that's our inline code. So we've got a chunk for when we do those bigger, more complex operations, and just inline for when we're doing simple little snippets that we just want a bit of a number in there or whatever. Chunks, codes. Chunks useful for the big stuff, the substantial stuff, wrangling, plotting, all that kind of biz. And inline is snippets of code, just slotting them in with our written text, written word. Those are our 2 things. When it comes to chunks, which is what we'll be using quite a bit, you often want, of course, to execute a lot more control over actually what is output in the final document. So it's true that by default, if you change nothing, Markdown, and you hit knit, and you put in a chunk of code, it'll spit out both, like it'll echo the code itself. So it'll embed the actual bit of code that you ran, and also the product of it. So it'll run the code, show you what you ran, and embed the actual results in the final document itself. We don't always want that, of course. We may not want to see the code. We may or may not want to see the results, all of that kind of stuff. We may want to change the size and orientation of figures that we put in there. And all of this kind of stuff is done through chunk options. So little options that we can specify for each of our little chunks here. And I think the most common ones are also spat out in, I closed it, in our little cheat sheet as well. So that's a great place to go. Cheat sheet, and we'll step through a few of them here. They very kindly put some chunk options in here, I'm sure. Yeah, there we go. So that's these bits, embed code. And we'll go step through a couple of what these things mean, but it's this little section here. So things like, for example, if you just want the product of code, so you've got your PDF, run this bit of code. I just want you to spit out the little statistical results. I don't actually need to see that I ran linear LM or GLM and blah, blah, blah. Just want the results. So here there's an option that's called echo. And if we set echo equals false, so we do this just by adding options. So one option or multiple options just to this first little bit in our chunk here. So always we'll have the backticks and then the R, and then we just add extra little options, little flags, and they'll be true or false generally, or maybe like a figure heights and widths we can specify. But we'll just add more and more options to this little opening bracket up here at the top. One that you might want to use is called echo, and that controls whether or not the code itself is output. Often you don't want it, you just want the results. So you could say echo as in don't echo the code. I just want to see the results. And that would be the product there. So we've moved here. Here's the default. But if I say no, echo equals false, I don't want to see the code, it just spits out the results. You can see. So it executes that. It doesn't embed the actual code itself in the final document. Same with plots. So if we're creating a plot, maybe you don't really care. You don't want to see the bit of code that creates the plot. You just want to see the plot. Same deal. Echo equals false. I don't want to see the code. Just show me the plot. And that's the exact same here. So this would produce this. Here's a plot. So it's a bit of text. And then calling a histogram on some built-in data. But we can see that it doesn't actually show me the code for doing it. It just shows me the result, which is nice. Sometimes you don't actually, you just want to run the code, or sorry, you just want to embed the bit of code, but you don't actually want to run it. You might, I don't know, be sharing with someone, hey, here's how you would do this thing. Here's the bit of code that you would use. So you don't actually need to evaluate the code or run it or embed its product. You just want to show the bit of code, kind of show you're working. You could use something like eval here. So eval is in evaluate. Do you want me to actually evaluate the code? Nope, just plonk the code there, but don't actually run it. There are cases where that might be what you want to do. So you could echo controls whether or not you show the code. Eval shows whether or not you run the code. So here, this leads to this, right? It displays the code, but it hasn't run it, so there's nothing else to show. Just the bit of code itself. Things like figures. So you may, if you're calling out a little histogram here, you may want to control the height and the width of this figure or its placement in the final document. Is it center aligned? Is it right aligned? All that kind of stuff. There are fig width and fig height arguments. Again, I regularly have to just have a look at the sheet or Google it or whatever. And that would be in here as well, I'm sure. Things like fig height and fig width, there they are. So that can control the exact orientation, dimensions, and placement of things like figures. Again, and we're just chaining together multiple options here with a little comma. So don't show me the code, comma. And when you do plot my little figure, I want it to be 3 inches high and 5 inches wide, or we could change it to centimeters if we wanted, whatever. We're just chaining them together with the little comma. And it's true that, and there are cases, of course, when another common one that you might use is where you actually you just want to run the code. You actually don't want to embed anything or use anything. So there are cases like at the top of an R Markdown document, say you're writing a paper. If you're writing a draft of a paper, you don't actually want any code at all in your final thing, generally in the main text. So there might be cases where you just want to load up that other script in the background or load these libraries so that I can do some stuff later on. But don't show anyone anything. Don't show them the code. Don't show them the product. Just run the code quietly in the background for me. And that's what include would help you do. That's what this include option would be. So it'll run the code in a chunk, but it won't output anything. It won't output plots or values or anything. It won't echo the code in any way. It just runs the code so that you can then maybe use it later on in your document. And so I do that, when sourcing other R files or loading up libraries or whatever have you. You don't need the user, the final reader, to see it. You just need it done in the background so that you can get on with more interesting things later on. That's what include lets you do. And you can do these, so you can do these on a per chunk basis. So for each individual little chunk that you're working with, you can set tweak options. But sometimes, if you work one way or the other, like generally you're writing a document where you don't want all the code to be echoed every single time and shown, you can just set a global option like a default. And we just do this up the very top here. There are these chunk options and you can do these global options. This is what it looks like, but arguably the easier way to remember this is just that every time if you just create a brand new R Markdown document in RStudio, it'll have, it always has some global options up the top here anyway. So you don't really need to remember that fancy bit of code because it always keeps a little default here up the top. And I could just add things here. So where it says chunk option set echo equals true. So that means by default, it's going to echo the code throughout all of my chunks. I could just tack on some more things as well. I could do, include, oh, no, actually I could do like big width. I want all my figures by default to be 5 by 5. 5 by 5. You can just chain on all your global options up there if you like. If there are some nice defaults that you have, you can tweak these things, and then that'll apply to everything subsequently, unless you manually change the values in a little chunk by itself. So you can do these things globally or locally. It's just the point, and that's how you do it globally for every chunk in your little document. But you can kind of let RStudio every time you make a new one, it includes it there, and that kind of reminds you that these things exist and how to do it. And that's just what we've been saying. Cheat sheets are good. Once you've kind of got the hang of, once you figure out that, the 5 or 6 things, as with all these things, a couple of things are just used constantly and then you remember them and they're fine. And for those more obscure things and other use cases, just Google it, use the internet. This is what our little cheat sheets and whatnot are for, as with all this stuff. It's almost certainly possible, whatever you want to do, you just need to find the little message board post or the bit in the cheat sheet that lets you do it. How do I place that on align that on the right and put some text on the left or whatever? It's all doable. It just might need a little fiddling, or you need to remember the right option. But those are probably the handful that I regularly reach for, just whether or not I want code shown, results shown, or nothing at all. And that's probably the big ones. So I think what I had planned now, I think we're going to move into RStudio itself. So we've got some Markdown skills. Now we're going to make an R Markdown document, and we're going to slowly maybe start to build up. Yes, we're going to start to actually build up a bit of a rough sort of template for ourselves. So you can just go to File, New File, Markdown. Give it a title if you like. We just want to document a document, and you hit OK. I would say keep it, unless I've given some instructions there. So to output PDFs, which is this little instruction I'll put here, you may need to do a little bit of extra work just initially, just one-off, because your computer will need a little bit of extra tooling to help you convert from R Markdown to a PDF. Giving you the instructions just up the top there, so if that's what you want, just make sure to take a moment and run that. But otherwise, it'll be able to output HTML by default. Word, you obviously need Microsoft Word installed. But if you do, that should just work as well. I'll just flag that it's really quite ugly. Getting to Word, PDFs and HTML look lovely because it has full control, basically, over how those things appear. Your Word document's never going to look very good. So it'll always need more fiddling if you're outputting to Word, because it's a complex, ugly, proprietary sort of thing. So if you do spit out, you can spit out multiple formats and you'll be like, oh, it's a nice HTML, nice PDF, and then there's ugly Word document. It'll always need a bit of fiddling. You always need to mess with the fonts and that if you want it to look as pretty as your PDF document. Blame Microsoft. So yeah, let's keep building up our little paper template. Then we'll learn a couple more tricks, including things like how to do references and whatnot, and that'll be our final little adventure. Yeah, I'll grab a drink and then I'll start building up my own little template. Start here. Yeah. Runs. Yeah, cool. And yeah, I'll just keep rebuilding as you go, which is the last point here, which probably should have put up, just to keep track. So if you're using RStudio to do just at this stage, which I would suggest, there's this knit button, which is the one that actually spits out and turns your R Markdown into a document. Or again, we just use the shortcuts, which keeps it simple. On Mac, it's Shift Command K. And if I push those, it knits it, and then it just brings up my little, once it's had a little think, there we go, there's my document. So I know what it looks like. You do that every now and then, add some words, add some titles, and then if it breaks somewhere along the line, it can just be easier to kind of track down. Oh, cool. I did not, in RStudio 1.4, all right. Visual mode, that's exciting.
You have it, it's like at the right corner. There is something like A.
Sorry, all my Zoom screens are in the wrong way here. Let me make this smaller. Okay, so what? Oh, it's this little thing, is it? Switch to visual Markdown editor. No way. Okay. Cool. Use visual mode. Oh, okay. All right. So what's is that? So if I'm going like, oh wow, yeah, okay. So that's kind of what we were talking about earlier. It's like a what you see is what you get kind of vibe.
I missed where the setting was. Where did you see the setting?
Oh, sorry, it's up this. It's this little one here.
Okay.
And you need RStudio 1.4, I think. So it's switched to visual editor versus source editor. Yeah, right. Interesting. I mean, oops. Yeah, right, okay. Oops. I really don't like it, but totally whatever works for you. I would find that really annoying, but that's just because I've learned it my way. So that would bug the heck out of me, because then I can't see the formatting there as well, and I couldn't, like I'd try and unbold that, but I'd be deleting words rather than asterisks, and to me that kind of kills the point of splitting the content from whatever. But I can completely understand. So whatever works for you. That's cool that it's built in now, though. I mean, that's great. So I'm going to stick to mine. Will just keep looking like this. But yeah, that's really neat. Good find. I didn't realize they're doing that. That can arguably be an easy way of just checking what things look like, though, without knitting every time. Then maybe you can just flick over to this view and see if it looks how you might expect it to. Introduction. Getting the methods.
Yeah, it seems like instead of being used to write, it's used to, like you said, just giving it a check and seeing if it's cool. Working the way you would like to. Yeah, which in the case of things like figures, I actually can see myself maybe using that, because sometimes it's hard to get it. You just constantly rebuilding, and you're like, I just want to move it like that far, or just want it to be 5 centimeters smaller. It can be
I remember I once wanted to check whether having a space line, whether my code gets right, and it would just take ages to run the whole page. No,
that's exactly. I think that's a great use case. I'll definitely use it for that. just when you're doing those little fiddly annoying things, like, is that line break working, or is that space creating a new paragraph like I want it to? Yeah, cool. So you can just flick over and have a look. That's pretty neat.
Is that a separate package, or is it just an updated version of R Markdown?
I think it's
That's
RStudio. Yeah. So it's RStudio itself has this built in, I think.
Because my old one is RStudio 1.3 something, and I just updated and it was just automatically. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I haven't updated any of my R stuff because I've got a couple of analyses that I'm terrified about right now.
It's fragile. Yeah, that is just running.
When I do, it'll be good to get that.
That's right.
This is after what version? I missed it.
Yeah, this is what version I've got. I think it's a pretty recent one. 20th, 9th. Sorry, it's a Ghost Orchid. I don't know. So I've got it on this. I'm not exactly sure when it came in. Yeah, we could check the help file.
No worries.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No, not at all. It's really cool. Thanks for that. I'll have to sneak that into my lectures. No, that's very handy. I wonder if there's a keyboard shortcut for flicking to that, even just to switch to source editor. Oops. Yeah, that's neat. So what did I suggest you do? Maybe let's run a little analysis on something. So pop in a chunk.
I missed what the command was for adding the
Chunks.
the chunks.
Are you on a Mac?
No.
Then that was in the chat, I think.
Control Alt I.
Yeah,
Sorry?
thanks very much.
Control Alt I.
Thank you.
Lovely. And it's Command Option I on Macs. Why isn't it working? No. This is not tidy data. That's why it's not working. You can also, like, once you've got multiple chunks going through your document there, you can also just run them. There are these little buttons here. They're, again, a shortcut keyboards as well, keyboard shortcuts, but we can just run an entire chunk. So if I want to say, look at the, here's a couple of lines of code where I, look at the top little bit of the CO2 data set and then run a little generalized linear model. Actually, look, and then let me save that as something, and then I run summary in one. So instead of manually, clicking on run that line, run that line, run that line, I can just run the entire chunk. So run all that, everything in there, just run it for me. And RStudio even gives you a preview if you like. You can turn this option on or off. Gives you a preview of what will be spat out into your document there as well. I find it a little bit annoying. I have it turned off on that.
For the when you run something that's got, it shows you either a preview, or let's say you're running the head or a plot or something.
Yep.
Is there a way when you're in RStudio, instead of having it spit out that figure in line, but rather let it split it out in the plots section of RStudio?
Oh, I see. Like, yeah, in the little plot window down here.
Yeah, in the plot window, yeah. Like,
yeah, it's a good question. I think there might be. So ultimately, that won't. Yes, so preview it in the window, but ultimately in the document, it'll just be embedded in the document. But yeah, I see what you're saying. I think there might be, but I think it's some kind of R-ish
okay.
option. No, I'm pretty sure it says it.
I can also go and have a look at just if you knew off the top of your head.
No, it's a good question. Oh yeah, there we go. Oh no, that's not. Your pain. Maybe not. I thought there was. I'll have to have a look. We can figure out Markdown previewing to use the viewer pane. Oh yeah, no, here we go. Oh yeah, so you can do that. How do I do that? That's a notebook. Apply. I think that might have done it. Let me have a look. Nope.
I think I might have found it. On that little, there's that little settings icon just above your R Markdown, next to knit. And yeah, that one. And then viewing. Oh, that looks like it's already ticked.
But is that working for you? Because I just changed it. I just changed it that, but it might not. I just.
Okay. No, I haven't tried. I haven't run it yet in mine.
Yeah, I agree though. That seems to be. Maybe if I. Let me reboot. Yeah, that would strike me as the option.
Actually, I just read here that, so it's in the same setting area there. But then you put chunk output in console.
Ah, okay. Wait, so it's, oh,
Yeah,
okay. So the instance is in my console.
Yeah, that's the one.
So remove all that output and do it in the console for me. All right, so that output's going there, and then the plot. Oh, there we go. Okay, yeah, yeah, nice one. All right.
Awesome.
So that kind of, I guess, functions more like normal R, like an R script. Yeah, that's actually nice. I'd probably do it that way. I'd get annoyed with all the stuff.
Yeah, I just think it gets really busy when you have all the things like coming out in the all the plots and all the tables and all that type of thing.
Yeah, that's nice. So that I'll just window or view pane. I wonder what the difference between those two is then. Don't know. But yeah, the key one seemed to be that chunk output in console was a good one. Okay, nice. I'll change that on my other computer too. Oh, I've already got that. All right. Yeah, lovely. Just gonna go drink water back into it.
I find that if you choose chunk output in console, then if you want to check the data, for example, if you want to see, say the head of the data set, it couldn't be shown.
Not even down there.
No, it is not there.
It's weird.
Is it the same for you?
It's working for me on the empty cars data set. I mean, it's bringing up the whole data set, but that's because it's really small, I think.
So is it only when you ask to show, for example, the head of the data, or?
I actually was using string, str, and see the iris in built data set.
I don't know that inbuilt data set, but if it is just str, it's also not showing it for me.
Pardon, did you say it show or it didn't?
No, it's not. I don't know that data set though, but it's not showing me. It's giving me a different thing, function and use method instead.
I will have to shift it to chunk output inline to be able to see it. The output, I mean.
I'm trying it as well, but I'm having trouble on my R Markdown, so just a second.
More problems?
I was trying to, because we know that now use chunk output in console, you can plot the figure in the right panel. But I try to see the data, say if you want to read the head of the data set iris, it is not shown under the lines, and I don't know where is that output.
But so for me, it's printing into my little console here. Is that not happening for you?
Yeah, it is for me, sorry, because I minimized that part. I was just
okay.
not in line. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's it. So I guess it's, I guess that option makes, it means everything. So this little bit here is what they call the console. That's technically a viewer pane, but yeah. So I guess by checking that option, it works like normal R in that sort of way. But you can't, it's either all or nothing. So it's all the code and the plots are down in the console, or nothing is. If I knit this, it should still. Oh, I just changed my data set, so that won't work. All right, I'm going to keep building mine a little bit. Let's just do 2. Oops.
Tom, would you mind explaining what the concept of knitting means? Like to knit the document?
Yes. Beyond the highly technical explanation that it is, it means make my document take my R Markdown and spit out the final document. So knitting is I don't know actually why it's called that specifically. But if you have a look at the little drop-down menu here as well, knitting is the process of taking your R Markdown document, which is just your content, because we've separated our content from presentation, and it does that magical middle step that gets us from content to final look. So in the simplest sense, it takes R Markdown and spits out either Word, PDF, HTML, slides, a couple of other things it can do, but that's basically what's happening here. It runs the magic in the background, and it applies those global sort of options, like what kind of document do we want it to be? What kind of font do you want to use throughout the whole thing? All that kind of stuff. And it does the little magic bit that gives us our PDF in the very end. And so as part of that process, what it does is like humans do, it reads from top to bottom. It reads out, it starts right up here. So it's got this, which we haven't gone into yet, but it takes our little bit of these global options that we specify up here. It'll then read this chunk. It'll then read this and this text. It'll then read this bit of code and execute that bit of code, right? So it steps through our whole document from top to bottom and then produces whatever we've told it to produce, PDF, HTML, what have you.
And when you say regularly knit the document to check for formatting issues, you just mean, for example, produce a PDF repeatedly.
Exactly. Yeah, that was just a tip. Although Lee kindly pointed out this other. So I just build it regularly, just to check that it's kind of things are roughly looking what I think they should look like. Things are executing and building correctly, all that kind of stuff. So that's all I'm suggesting. It's just part of workflow. I'd like write a couple of paragraphs, knit it, make sure that my references are indeed slotting in correctly and all that kind of stuff, just because it's easy to track problems if things go up. Or if it just breaks, then I'll know, okay, something I've done in the last 10 minutes has not quite worked. Right, what was that? That's all I mean. It's just kind of part of my workflow. but yeah, it was pointed out that we've got that new version of RStudio actually has this little visual editor, which might take the place of a little bit of that as well, because you can kind of just flick over to this and it shows you a live preview of what things look like. And that's kind of part of the reason I do knit regularly, just to see, is that where I meant to be putting it? And that's appearing and whatnot. So I might even just flip it, although I tend to, if I'm writing stuff, it'll be in a different editor. But yeah, if I'm in RStudio, that might actually take the place of some of that, because that's kind of cool. Oh yeah, that's looking good. So let's do our model. Yeah, and there's a quick question. So caching is a good option. That's an interesting one. Caching is, so when we knit, the question in the chat was, there's a chunk option called cache, or cache, or I don't know how people pronounce it. Good question. I don't think I've ever heard it pronounced out loud. Cache. Cache equals true or false. So what this can do is, if I added that to a chunk, what it does is actually save. It runs that chunk the first time I knit my document. It'll come down and it'll read all this and do all this, and it'll hit this and it'll say, okay, cache equals true. So it'll run this the first time I knit the document, it'll run it, but it'll actually save those results on my computer. And then subsequent times I rebuild the document and I knit again and again and again. It'll only rerun that chunk if I've changed something in that chunk. I know the use case for that is when you've got like a big heavy bit of code that does like creates a really complex, Bayesian bootstrapping model that takes like 5 minutes to build or whatever. Every time you rerun your document, you don't want to be waiting 5 minutes for it to do its thing again. So you can just, if you use this cache equals true option, it'll just run the chunk the first time, save those results to your computer, and then it'll keep slotting them in, of course, but it'll only rerun the chunk from scratch if you actually change something in that chunk. So it just saves you time.
I had some problem with that function because I changed some of the code and then I need it again. But when I see the result of HTML, the figures, it was still the wrong figure. Yeah. And then I got to go back to the folder to delete the cache files, the whole folder away, and then it's the only way I know how to fix that. And I don't know if you have any experience with that.
So it wasn't updating, like you changed something and it wasn't updating, it was still just embedding the wrong thing. Yeah. No, I've actually only used it a couple of times because I've only had data big enough to running big simulations. Can't remember hitting that specific problem, so I'd have to have a look around. But my understanding was that it was meant to, just when you change things in there, it should automatically update. But that's interesting. So the short answer is I don't know, sorry. But for future renders, yeah.
And that was kind of scary because you thought you got the corrected the
yes, exactly,
result. It wasn't.
And as always, let's just Google an answer. Okay, yeah, right. Oh, okay, hold on. So that's the data file. Right, but that's more relating to loading up data. So it won't know if if you use a cache, for example, for loading up a big data set, it's saying that R isn't clever enough to know if like your CSV has changed, in which case it won't automatically update, but that sounds different to your use case. I know what you mean there, but yeah, maybe there's some complexity in there that I'm just not so familiar with.
That's all right. I just thought that maybe.
That's an interesting one, yeah, just sure. And just flagging it for people as well. I'd have to do a little reading as to when it updates and why. Right. Yeah, I'd have to have a look. That's odd, but maybe there's just be careful with using it. So in principle, that's how it works, but yeah, it could be tricky. Cool. Well, we might we'll continue building on this one file anyway, so we might crack on. Sorry, I'm just kidding. It's exam day, so I'm getting the panicked emails in the background. Cool.
Can I ask, I'm not getting the formatting coming through. What am I doing wrong? We're putting the hash in front of the introduction, but I'm not getting anything that is any different to any other text. What am I doing wrong?
So it's not looking anything like.
No, it doesn't look like a heading. It just looks like the rest of the text.
So what if you? So if you just like it,
Weird.
That is weird. And this is on a. If you just open up like a brand new blank R Markdown file, so just the absolute default one that it gives you.
Yeah.
And you just knit that. So you just click just file, new R Markdown file or whatever, and then just hit knit. You got to save it somewhere. Yeah. Just compare it to the one that pops up on my screen and we'll see. Oh no, okay, that's why I didn't want that option. Maybe it's that. There we go. So it should just look like that. And if you just change nothing and hit knit.
It doesn't look exactly the same, but it does have the text size differences. It doesn't look
Okay.
as bold as yours, but it does have the text size differences. So I don't know.
All right. So yeah,
That's okay. I'll go
no,
back.
it's good. It's tricky to remote without sharing screens or something maybe. But
Yeah, no, don't worry. Don't worry. I've got almost exactly the same as you. So
okay, something's just going wrong between the two.
Yep.
Did you add a space between the hashtag and the start of the first word?
Well picked.
That'll be it.
Nice one.
Thank you.
Nailed it. Cool. All right. Well, we might go into some slightly more, because we'll just continue playing with these, but we'll just go into some slightly more advanced things like how do we, what the heck do we do with our references and that kind of stuff. So we've had a bit of a wander through Markdown. we're experts now. A little bit of a wander through combining R with our Markdown, so putting in code and the products of code in there. We need to know a little bit about this top little bit, this front matter, for some of those global options that we might like to edit. And that'll include things like how to put a bibliography in there and that kind of stuff. So yes, it is called, the YAML front matter. It's another silly acronym for yet another markup language. It is a whole other little language unto itself. We don't care, it doesn't matter. Don't worry about any of it. But it's just so you know what these words and these things actually mean. So it's up the top of every single R Markdown document. It'll be up there. It helps R and RStudio and whatever you're using to render, to knit these documents. It helps it let it know that it's an R Markdown document, and it controls all that big stuff. What kind of format do you want? Do you have a bibliography, and where is it? Do you want a title? Do you want me to put the date or an author on there? All that kind of stuff. What kind of fonts do you want to use if you get into that? It's in there whenever you create, if you use RStudio to create a new one, it's this little bit. So it starts with 3 little dashes and ends with 3 little dashes. Then it's got some magical keywords that mean particular things. And then we can add arguments for each of those. Like we can add a title and call it something. We can add author, we can add a date, we can add output to tell it exactly what kind of output we want. I think the only one that's actually essential, you can delete everything except for, I'm pretty sure output is the only one that is actually essential. Oh yeah, okay, actually, there we go. So I could do something like, pretty sure I can get rid of all of that stuff and just hit the output. And then if I knit that, it should still run fine. But it puts a few sensible defaults in there by itself. Yeah, there's my nice PDF. So I could do things like title is one of our magic keywords. I can add a title, I could add a subtitle, I think is one of our magical keywords. Subtitle, I think there. I think author is another one. I said. I wonder if I need to put that in. And then if I knit those, they'll do particular things. And so you can look some of these up if you like. Again, it's probably in the cheat sheet, but you can see that this title, magical title keyword, sticks a big bold title up the top here. There's a subtitle. There's an author, there's dates, there's other things we can do in that little important bit of heading. And so that's what I mean by these global options. We can change fonts and things as well. If you want to get really complex, like more in-depth customizations, you can actually link to other little bits of formatting, these like Latex header files. And so you can get pretty complicated stuff in there if you want, like, I don't know, really fancy equations or other kind of things. So you can link it, helps link that document to other files. But yeah, at its simplest, you just need to, it just tells you like what you want to spit out on the other end and any of those other big global options. The big one is output, and mostly, so you can, if you're using RStudio, you can actually manually select it using this little knit button, this little drop down menu here, and it'll tell you, do you want an HTML, PDF, or a Word? And if you pick one of those, it'll add the relevant bit to your little YAML by default. So I just said PDF there, but what if I say HTML? We can see that that just changed. So the output just changed to update itself. Now I'm getting a big HTML file, which is a different output. I could have multiples. I could have PDF and HTML. I want you to spit out everything, and just save them on my computer. So you can do all of that by all means. But these are the main ones. And variations on them, but you don't really need to remember them. Mostly you'll be using PDFs. HTML is useful. It's a very lightweight way of sharing things. I might use that, instead of emailing PDFs around, HTML files are good because they're very lightweight. They just open up in any browser. It's nice. Or Word documents, but as I said, they'll be pretty ugly, but it'll certainly work. So that's probably the biggest option that you'll always find up the top. And I think it's the only essential one. As I said, yeah, like some other little things we could use, things like titles or subtitles, author, if you like, dates. Wonder if there's YAML tips in here. Choose output. So those are some tips on your outputs. That's pretty much all the cheat sheet gives us by the looks of it. Title and author. Yeah, there might be some others in there, but I don't use it much for that. But those are your main output types anyway in your cheat sheet. So this, we'll go over this a couple of times and we'll get hands-on because we're learning new things, but bibliography is a big one and something that we really need to do our work. So the way it works, bibliographies work, they use their own little kind of language. You may have seen something called, you may have heard of something called Bibtex, B-I-B-T-E-X. When you're using EndNote or Zotero or whatever, or you're using Google Scholar, right? You'll often see that listed as one of the output formats. So I can try and cite something here, for example. Bibtex, that's it. That's always one of the options, or EndNote or RefMan. And if you want to like export things from EndNote, you can always select Bibtex as one of your options. Now, what it is another kind of plain text file. It's just another plain text format, so it's lovely and compatible. It works with everything in principle, unless they're really jerks about it. It should work with everything because it's a standard. And so that's the format that we need to be using for our references, for them to work and play nicely with R Markdown. We'll go through how to do it in kind of a manual way, but I'll just flag that it's totally possible. If you're using EndNote at the moment, or I use Zotero, which I still use to manage all of my PDFs and references and everything. And you can still totally do that. So it's just, you might do a little bit of fiddling on the back end so that things are saved in the right format for R Markdown to recognize. But while I'll step through it here kind of manually, just to show you what's happening, you can just set it up with your reference manager of choice. So it's kind of automated, and it's just as easy as you would be inserting things like you do from EndNote into a Word document. You can get it that simple. It just takes a little bit of, we just need to tweak it in a couple of ways. So I'll walk you through manually, but yeah, just flagging that you don't need any radical changes to your current workflow. I'm sure there would be a way. I know how to do it in Zotero, but I'm not sure about EndNote because I haven't used that in a while. But for it to work in our R Markdown document, there are two main things, or really just one essential thing, but two we might like to let our document know. One is that we need to tell our R Markdown document where my bibliography is. So where is my text file that contains all of these references in Bibtex format? So I'll click here. So that's what a reference looks like in a Bibtex format. That's one reference. It's a book. It's got a keyword here that I'll tell you what that means in a second. It's got a title, it's got an author, it's got a year. You can kind of get a sense of what it's doing there. We'll never need to type these in or manually edit them, but it's just so you kind of get a sense of that's what one entry looks like, one Bibtex entry. Let's go to another one, just have a look, because there's maybe a paper, No, it's not a good one. Patterns of growth in birds. Thrilling. All right, so here's an article. There's a keyword, it's got a title, it's got an author, it's got a journal, it's got a volume, number, pages, all that kind of stuff. Again, I'm never going to manually edit those or type those in, that's fine. My reference manager will handle that. But that's what a Bibtex entry looks like. So on my computer, somewhere, I'm going to have a file, a text file, and it's just jam-packed with these. So it's just got entry after entry. Now I've set up Zotero so that I've got like, whatever thousands of references, and it just saves them all and keeps them all updated in this one master file sitting on my computer. So there's like a text file on my computer that has like thousands of these, and I could possibly even find it. I don't have Zotero set up on this computer, but we can go quickly. I'm sure the file is here. Or I think it's this one, master.bib. And it'll be really ugly and sort of barely readable. Because I never edit this file myself. I do it, Zotero handles it all. But you can see there's just citation, reference after reference. Here's a paper, authors, year, all of that. And this would just scroll on because there's thousands of them. There's heaps of them. So what our R Markdown file, our paper needs to know is where that lives. So I've been a bit lazy, so I've got like a master one that just sits on my computer. So I just need to tell it, well, go and look in there, because that's where all of my references live. And so any sort of citation I tell you to add will just be living in there. But it is totally also possible for full reproducibility to like create little localized libraries, right? Because if people don't have my master bibliography, they won't be able to rebuild my document from absolute scratch unless I share that as well. Typically, I just get a bit lazy and I don't care about that level of reproducibility per se. So that's kind of somewhere my line lands. I don't necessarily mind that people aren't able to rebuild an R Markdown document from scratch. You know, they can pick through it by all means, but so I'm not too fussed. And because you end up submitting Word documents anyway to journals, so that just gets lost. That's one thing we need to tell our Markdown though, is where in my computer is this file that contains all these references in Bibtex format. And we can also style them in a particular way. So in the same way that EndNote, you can, you know, I want it to be like behavioral ecology or evolution or AMNAT or whatever. We can style our references. And to do that, we need to use this kind of style file called a CSL file. And there are big databases full of them. You know, you might just grab a couple of the more popular ones and I'll tell you where to get them from. But that's the only other thing. So that is like a styling file that says, well, in text, you've got to have like the author's last name and then the year separated by a comma. And then in the references, it's, you know, all of that fiddly little crap that editors just love and love to reject your papers on because it's, you know, you're missing some commas. All of that stuff is handled by the CSL file. So once you grab like the template for behavioral ecology or AMNAT or whatever, then you just say, well, here's the template I want you to use. So just apply that to my document and don't tell me about it ever again. So those are the two things. Those are the two basic ingredients. Those go in our YAML front matter in that top little bit because they apply to the whole document. And then in text, how it works is we draw in these little things called keywords. So every single one of these entries and every single one, if I download it from Google Scholar, the first thing here is a little magical keyword, and that is unique to that entry. And that's the thing that we need to pluck out and pop into our R Markdown document, because that's how we say, and that's how we tell the document itself to go and fetch all the important details from this entry. So if I say, here's a little keyword here, and the way we actually insert them is using our hard brackets, @ symbol, and then we pop in the what's called the citation key, or yeah, citation key is what it's called. And it's a little keyword that corresponds to a full entry somewhere in my bibliography file. So that matches up one-to-one with a full entry that has like the title of the paper and all the authors and the year and all that stuff. So here I've said I've made some claim, put my little hard brackets, and I've said the details of this little citation here. I just, you know, you go and figure it out, but here's my magical little key. That will match up to something that's stored in this file here. And so when we knit and when we render this thing, it'll know, it'll go, okay, I'm going to go look in this file for the entry corresponding to this. And then I'm going to swap it out. Actually, I'll show you in a tick. I'm going to swap out that first of all. So I'm going to get rid of that. And it'll just say White 2020 or White et al. 2020. And then in your references, I'll put in plunk in the big full bit of information there, just as you've told me to style it. So that's the basic workflow, is we have our references in a big Bibtex file. Maybe if you want, you know, you can just go with the defaults, or you can just add a CSL style file there as well. Actually, just use one for all of them. I don't really pay a lot of attention to it, so I just you know, have one default one that I just use for everything. You then define these, and just once, you know, in a one-off bit of setup, you just point to these in that heading little bit of your R Markdown document. And then as you're going along, you use keywords in the text to reference each of those particular little publications, White 2020, you know, whatever. And then you knit the document and it'll swap those out and replace them all with their relevant with all the full details in your references list, and in text there, it'll replace it out with in the relevant style that you said. Maybe it'll say White et al. Maybe it'll say White Umbers Lati et al. 2021, whatever. But it handles all that magic. So yeah, again, just touching on, this is what kind of the raw stuff looks like. We don't really, here it is, and you can recognize it, and you can kind of see what it's doing and how it's just a particular way of storing information. But we'll never edit these manually. You don't need to. Your reference manager can handle that. But up here is our little keyword. Then it's got a bunch of information. And so the keyword is just the thing that we need to slot into our document. And then the rest of it, R Markdown knows, all right, I'm going to go fetch it and then stick all that rest of that stuff in, nicely formatted. Fantastic. So this is kind of, an example of what it might look like. We use the keywords, the magic words here, bibliography. And then this is the name of a file that's sitting on my computer somewhere. And that's the file that contains all of these references. And so it knows every time then I use a keyword, it'll go, all right, I'll go search that file, pull out the information, slot it in, and we're good to go. So here's an example of how one jumps to the other between knitting. So here I've got a claim, this claim is disputed, and I've got some paper by Shea and one by Luttridge, and these are the keywords corresponding to their entries. And then the final document will look like this. And it'll have, in the references list, it'll have the full details of these things nicely formatted for me. I don't need to worry about that. So I'll go, I don't know how many, I've got a couple of tips in the slides, but I can also just show you just like, my workflow to get a sense of it. I'll have to swap computers.
There's a good, I have a quick question. What about the same author? He or she has two publications in the same year.
Yep, good point. So it'll the reference manager you use, if you manage these things through Zotero or EndNote, it'll assign a unique little. This will be completely unique. So it'll automatically have like a Shea 2014 and a Shea 2014B, Shea 2014C or whatever. And then your paper, it's your reference, when you knit things, it's also clever enough to know if you've got Shea 2014 and Shea 2014B or whatever. It's clever enough to know that you've got two in the same year, and it'll follow the rules relevant to, one will be A, one will be B, that kind of thing. So yeah, good point. Your reference manager or whatever will assign a unique key to it, and the knitting process is clever enough to know when you've got multiples from the same years, and it does so in accordance. I think it's typically in accordance with. It's got some defaults, but it'll do so in accordance with these rules as well. Whatever you've said in your style file, but it's clever enough.
But when you import them into your master bib file, they gotta be different.
They do have to be, no, they don't, like my reference manager will figure that out. I don't need to edit them. So it assigns, if I have Shea 2014 already in Zotero and they published a second paper that year, as they do, I'll just import that and it'll be clever enough to go, oh wait, that key Shea 2014 is already in use. So I'm going to give this one Shea 2014B or whatever. Actually, the way I can show you in Zotero on my other computer, these keys are actually set up, they have more information than this. So typically they'll also have, all the way I've got it set up, they'll also have the first word of the title of the paper. And so it's very rare that you'll ever have like, or the first two words. And so it'll be Shea 2014 spiders and flies or something like that. So those two will never, the keys will never be the same unless you're really just churning out the same paper over and over again. So the key will always be unique. That'll be handled by your reference manager. And then in the paper, it's clever enough to know if you've got two that break the rules because they're in the same year, it'll just call one A and one B in accordance with whatever order you slot them in, So it's smart enough to do all that.
All right. Sorry, you go, Laura.
Thanks. Well, my question was a little bit related because I wanted to know, like, normally, like say for example, if I'm writing in Word, EndNote, I would just like say insert and then I can type and it would just, I wouldn't need to memorize these keys.
Yeah.
So yeah, I want to know in this case, how would that be?
That's a good question. There's a couple of good ways to do it. I will.
You will have to have good memory.
Yeah, you've got to remember 10,000 keys, and that's all you got to do. Let me see. I'll show you. So there are two ways to do it. You can do some in RStudio, but like I said, I don't use RStudio to write itself. So you can actually use it in RStudio. Like there's this thing, things called like citer, for example. So if you want to insert a citation, it's clever enough to, once you've linked up to your little bibliography file, you can do a little search function like that. Like, oh, it's a paper, it's one of John Endler's and Endler, I think it was in 20 something, it'll just kind of search it and slot it in. You can also do it through your reference manager like you do. I don't know how EndNote works exactly. I can show you the workflow in Zotero. I suspect something similar exists, in which case it's exactly the same. So I just look up when I need to slot a reference in. I'm like, oh, it's by, whoever, Kate in 20 something. I do that in Zotero, and then I just copy paste, and I don't even look at the key because the copy paste function just slots in the key. So it doesn't matter. But yeah, so you can achieve the exact same workflow. You don't need to be memorizing these ridiculous keys or even looking at the keys and manually typing them in. You can just copy paste stuff. So you can get to that same place. This is one way to do it. I'll show you another one. I'll have to swap my zooms over once I maybe I'll see if I can burn through these slides and then I'll jump over there. But yeah, there are packages built in, but I don't know, writing in RStudio isn't so lovely, but they do exist. So it would be a matter of fiddling our editors. Sorry, Kate, did you have something as well?
I was actually just, I'm still fighting with EndNote and wishing I'd changed years ago to something else because I hate it. But I'm still in EndNote, and I was wondering, I didn't quite follow the change to Bibtex format. So do I need to export all my references to a Bibtex format because they're not in a Bibtex format in EndNote?
No, that's a good question. And again, I need to learn EndNote. I'll show you how I do it.
No, you don't. It's horrible. Don't even go there to say I'm not answering that question. I'm going to stick with it. I'm just going to sit smugly and enjoy it.
No, I'll show you in principle what would need to be done. I can show you the Zotero form of it. And I suspect something as equivalent as possible in EndNote. I just haven't figured out how to do it, but I should for my students because they will be using that. The way to do it in Zotero, again, I'll show you, is like you've just got your big thing. I can set up once off. I just set up an option where I say keep all of these all of these references in my whole library. I also just want you to keep them stored in a little Bibtex file on my computer, and you keep that updated. Every time I add something, just tack it into that file as well and keep it updated. Never tell me about it, I don't care. And then I just point all of my R Markdown documents at that file. So it's all automated and it's all handled through Zotero. I suspect EndNote could do something similar unless it's really mean, which it might be, I don't know.
Okay,
but
thank you.
Yeah, no, it's also a good question. I'll show you how I do it anyway. So we'll see how far we can get, keeping those in mind, and we will come back to them for sure. All right, so that's references. Yes, that's the referencing bit. That's kind of as complex. That's the bulk of it, and I'll show you in more practical terms how I handle it. But all those things you've just said are totally possible. You can replicate something very similar to your like Word workflow where you just plunk this in here and handle it for me. That's very possible. This was just a more general, which we've already touched on really. I was just jumping ahead a bit because this is often questions we get as well in terms of general workflows. So there are two ways which we've already talked about a little bit as to how you might use R Markdown, depending on the circumstances. So you can do everything all in one. We can handle like all the importing data and manipulating it and plotting and writing and putting all our text and stuff in there as well. That can be great for, like we've said, little notebooks where we're thinking out loud, sharing with people, doing slideshows. Supplementary materials are good. If you like really want to show you're working, and you have to show you're working in some cases and show all the code, that's great. For like writing a paper or maybe a technical document though, you can, even your code itself can just get to, 1,000 lines or whatever, and then it starts becoming unreadable. So it can also just make sense to split all the analysis stuff off from the writing and the presentation really. I tend to favor that. Actually, no, I use them both for basically these sort of use cases. Quick thinking out loud, I'll just do it all in one, it's fine. But for papers and whatnot, I don't want, 1,000 lines of processing code hidden and then my actual paper written at the end, because it's a silly big file. It's too painful to work with. And so we can split them off in some of the ways that we've talked about. One of them is this magical source function, and it helps us daisy chain different files together and different R scripts together. So what it does, if you call source and then you say, here's an R file that contains a bunch of R code in it, what this source function will do will run that whole script from top to bottom, every single line in it, as you could interactively, and it will return the results of that. It will return the results of that script to your current little environment. So if you've saved objects, for example, or you've saved a ggplot in some script or whatever, and then you run source, everything you've done in there will become available in your current little environment. So that can be very cool and powerful. Yes, as I said, so if you create anything, like you save the results of a model or you load up data and save them in an object, everything you've done in that other file will then become available in this current environment that you're working in. And so you can use them. And so it's great for just like what we've already been doing naturally a little bit, and what we've chatted about is breaking things up a bit. When I'm running analyses, more and more, I really like to break stuff up. I'd have all my functions stayed in one little script, and plotting done in another, wrangling done in another, done it sequentially. So I know where to look if something breaks. If I need to, check out these outliers and remove them, I'll do that in my little wrangling bit. Or something's wrong with the plot, so I look in the plot file. I don't have to scroll through thousands of lines of code. It's just easier for humans to read, keeping with our, our tidy rules. Computers don't care; they'll run it all the same. Humans need to be able to read this stuff, including me in 5 years or whatever. And I know if there's a file called wrangling.r and plots.r, I know where to look if my plots look weird. It'll be in plots. And so we can use this source function to do some clever little daisy chaining. Here's an example, combining R with R Markdown, like a standard R analysis script with R Markdown. So on the left here, I've just got like a typical little analysis script where I load up some data. This is built-in data, so who cares? Built-in data, and then I run a model and I save that little linear model to this object here called car model. So there exists in this environment an object called car model, which is the results of this running this little linear model. And then in my R Markdown document, you've got this typical blurb up here. So there's some titles and all that stuff. There's some global options. Okay, and then here's the bulk of it. So I've got a heading here saying analysis. Let's load the result. I'm obviously just thinking out loud here. Let's load the results for our analysis. So I run source cars, and then this R Markdown document, it reads it top to bottom like a human does. So when it gets to this point, it stops, and then it jumps over here and it runs this top to bottom in its entirety. So it goes, all right, source, everything in this, I want you to, so I jump over here, it runs it. Now everything created in this R script is available to me here. So then I can just say, and now we summarize the results. And I can call summary on the object that I created over here, because everything here is available to me now. So I can call summary on my little linear model, and that'll work just as you would expect it to. It'll have your R squared and p-value, and it'll spit all that stuff out. Haven't actually had to run the code here or load data or do all that. That's all been offloaded to this little file, and I've daisy chained them together. And so that can be a nice little workflow for those bigger and more complex things. And if you're more comfortable, and I just like writing straight up R code. R Markdown is more for when I really need to get words in the mix. So yeah, I tend to daisy chain them up like that, but it's a cool little function.
Tom, can I ask, you don't need to point to cars? You don't need to tell it where to go?
Only because that's a built-in data set. If I was like loading up a CSV or something, I should have done a better example.
I meant you don't have to point to the R file, the script.
This script?
Yeah.
Yes, I've done that here. Sorry, that's what.
You don't need to tell it where to look for that.
I do. Sorry, I take your point. Yes, in that the way this example is running, this is assuming that they're sitting in the exact same place. So you're right.
Needs to be in
the
same folder.
No, they don't need to be, but this would just need to be a path, like a full path or a relative path. Yeah, you know what I mean? Sorry about that. I could have done a better example. So yeah, in this one, they're sitting together, but that could also be like ... data or scripts ... yeah, so that is a path. Yeah, I could have, no, I didn't make that very clear. Yes, good point. So in that case, they're sitting together, but I could put it wherever, as long as I've got a relative path saying, go and look for it here. Yeah. So actually, before we jump into this, because we can just go freeform after this is the last chunk, we'll we're doing, I think the last little exercise here is getting our bibliography working, and I'll jump to my other computer and show you how mine works. The last 2-3 slides are just showing you some examples. There's heaps of stuff you can do once you get a bit comfortable with it and just draw in packages that do all of the hard work. You can make lovely, like, you can make whole books. People write books after books after books. This is one we were just digging into. This is all written in R Markdown. Each one of these little chapters, think it would just be an R Markdown script, and they've used a package to weave it into a thing and a website, and then they've plunked it on to like an automated like Git or GitHub, and it builds the website as well. So you can offload a lot of that hard work and do just by knowing a bit of R Markdown. You can, write books and knit them together and have websites and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's all I was suggesting here. We can do books. All of these slideshows, these slides are all written in R Markdown. I wonder if I've got some here. So here's today's slides. This file, I think W4 workshop slides, maybe. Yeah, that's right. So here we go. This is what you're looking at. So this is the final version we're looking at, and here's all the raw code that creates it all. I've just used these headings to split up different slides. There's a few little tricks you just need to learn as to how they work, but that's it. So this whole thing, let's even find, where am I at the moment? Adventures in R Markdown. So that is the slide we're on right now. And that gives rise to this and these nice looking slides. So that's all R Markdown. What else can we do? Websites. For most of my lab site, it's pretty easy to, the only way I interact after a bit of setup, my website just exists as like a few Markdown files sitting on my computer. I edit them, I send them off to the ether, and they get turned into a nice looking website, but I never have to do anything except edit some text files sitting on my computer. So just making the point, there's a whole gallery of cool examples of cool, weird stuff you can do with R Markdown. Interactive widgets. So there's cool, like Shiny, if you've ever heard of this thing called Shiny. That's a powerful tool for creating these like interactive websites, essentially, but these widgets and things that you can manipulate and play with. You can create data dashboards, which are things that businesses, love, and they're widely used in industry, where you're constantly hoovering up data, putting out continuously updated visualizations that are available to people that maybe aren't like running code and all that kind of stuff, but you can create whole dashboards. What else can we do? Presentations, books, websites. There's a bunch of templates for things. I write my CV in R Markdown because it's nice and easy to keep it looking pretty. And all sorts of documentation. So it's just making the point that you're not just learning some weird arcane little way of writing a really difficult way of writing a paper. It's quite a cool way of writing a paper, I'd argue, first and foremost. But there's also a lot of other things that this can lead to. So it's kind of a little language unto itself. And you can do some really cool stuff, I think. Oh, so look, this is a big dashboard that's written in R Markdown. I don't know what it's doing. CRAN, it's monitoring downloads of packages from CRAN. So that's pretty neat. This would all be written in R Markdown. So it's just some text files that someone's written, basically pushed up and given the right instructions to a package online. And then you get some pretty cool stuff out of it. It looks really professional and data sciencey and whatnot. So it's a cool set of general skills as well. Anywhere we might be manipulating data, I think. That's pretty neat. A little more about Shiny. So we learned a little bit about, that's our Markdown. We'll keep, that's kind of the long and the short of it. Maybe let's try and get our bibliographies working, and I'll run you through what mine kind of look like. And then, but yeah, that's the adventures in R Markdown. Any questions more generally on that, or we can just ask away by all means. But that's kind of.
Yeah, I have a question. It's for sharing it. So I think that the best, it looks so much better, like all the code and everything when it's in HTML.
Okay.
And it has like more functionality because you can have like the bar and everything.
Stuff, yeah.
But then, for example, for sharing the code, like say for publication and everything, we might be required to put it in a PDF, or do you have a particular, or do you share it in any particular format?
Yeah, right. PDF, I wouldn't do PDF, but I would, I mean, so when I'm publishing code, what do? I have the data. Mine are just R scripts. I don't share R Markdown files in particular, unless it's for like a supplement. I do for supplementary materials, in which case it'd just be HTML. I think I've done some here, but otherwise, what I'm sharing is the code, the data itself, and the code, which is just R files. Yeah, I only really use R Markdown to either write the paper itself, and I don't really share that. I don't share the raw stuff because inevitably it ends up as a Word document and whatever, so it's kind of lost. The chain of reproducibility is lost anyway. Or I might share for a supplement, I might share the HTML version of it with the code and everything embedded, which I think I've done in some cases. And I'm just trying to figure out where supplementary examples. So here's this was a supplementary material that we included for a paper. It's all just R Markdown, and it's just the HTML version. And it's perfect for that kind of thing, for a supplement. The benefits of HTML over PDF are that it's way easier to copy the code and actually run it from HTML. So I can highlight all this code and pinch it and rerun it and extract it and all that kind of stuff. But PDFs, it's all embedded in there. And so it's really janky and hard to get the code back out and actually reuse it if anyone wanted to really rerun these analyses, whereas they can just, copy and paste these chunks and grab them and do all that kind of stuff.
Oh, sorry.
No, go on.
I was gonna ask, have you ever found like any problem with like the journal saying like you should not update HTML files?
Not yet, mercifully. For a supplementary material, you can kind of generally give them whatever you want. And I haven't hit them complaining about HTML files yet, I don't think. Yeah, it's true. I could completely understand that there would exist journals that do, and they would just be grumps about it because they need it in PDF or whatever. They only accept, JPEGs and PDFs or something. But no, not yet. I just give them the HTML file. And everyone can open it as long as you've got a browser and a computer, you can open it. So yeah, I haven't hit that, thankfully, but I could imagine it.
Just curious, what was the best way to do it? Also for like the reproducibility of the data. So,
sure. Yeah. Probably. Well, I'd favor HTML over PDF. If for like a supplement like this, I would probably do it this way, for sure. If you're because it's like a walkthrough example, sort of how to do it. And this is great because you can trace, you can see where these plots are coming from because this code generates this plot exactly. If people wanted to run it, they could just do that and copy and paste it. So I'd definitely say, HTML is nice way to do it for that kind of a thing. And yeah, then for the main gist of it, I tend to just use plain R for my analyses and whatnot, so people should be able to run them. So that was like a supplement. But...
Got it, thanks.
Tom, can I ask, do you share this supplementary HTML during the review?
I do, yeah. Yeah, for that I would, for sure. That I'd just share it like I would anything else. So you don't have to. I've hosted this supplementary file, so this exists on the internet now via my website. But you could also just upload the HTML file as just like you would a figure or whatever, and only the reviewers will be able to see it.
Do you save this at GitHub?
Yes. Well, my website's built on GitHub, so yeah, that's where everything is living. And yes, when I'm sharing stuff, because I work with Git and GitHub anyway, you can go to.
I was just wondering if GitHub can create kind of private link because I wanted to share that during the review, but I couldn't because if I want to share, I can only make it public, which is a bit risky. So I didn't do that.
No, fair enough. I don't think there's such a way to do that in GitHub. So yeah, it's either fully private, in which case it's like just invited people that can see it, but you don't know who the reviewers are, or it's public. And in principle, anyone can see it. So when I submit papers, like my own stuff, I just make it public and I give it to the reviewers, and I don't think anyone's going to be able to beat me to publishing the thing in the month that it's in review or whatever. Like, it would just be kudos to them if they can do it and understand the data and write up my methods and do all that. Like, I fully appreciate it, and I'm not trying to be dismissive because I know people rightly have concerns about that kind of thing. I've never hit it, and I like doing it that way, so I've never really been worried. And reviewers like it, and I love getting papers when you can like run through the code and stuff. It's cool because I do, and they catch issues, and I catch issues. And
it's easier to understand for the reviewers.
Yeah, it's much easier for the reviewers, and you don't just need to take people at their word. Or if you don't understand something, like benefit of the doubt, you're like, that doesn't really make sense. Where did that come from? You can go into their code and be, yeah, that's where it came from. Could you just make this clearer? Great, thanks. Rather than like, all these details are missing. I have no idea what you're doing. It can make the job easier.
I have another question. It's related. Well, when you are in a like double-blind review, can you share through GitHub?
Yeah, it defeats double-blind review, but that's a broader philosophical issue. You can kind of have one or the other, right? We can have, I don't know what the easy solution is. It's an interesting one. It definitely does. So I share the data and code and whatever, I strip out the authors, and then I just link to my GitHub account, and I'm like, well, there's all the data, so you can review my paper properly. So of course it gives it away. If I had to pick one, I would be favoring the move towards, open data and whatnot. But yeah, it's a tricky one. They're kind of philosophically incompatible in some ways. So I wouldn't know how to properly anonymize. You could maybe make just a totally anonymous account. You'd have to put some effort in. But no, I just don't bother. I just give up on the anonymity aspect of it.
Okay, thanks.
No worries. It's a good question. So while you're also, I'll try and swap computers here, and while we're getting our bibliographies going, share a little bit about Zotero. I need a dongle, stupid dongles. Oh yeah, Luke. Yeah, Luke's stuff is great. There are some people out there as well that do this stuff really well. Dan Noble, I use when I'm running meta-analyses, I use Dan's stuff because they publish all the code for their whatever, and they're like learning tools. I just learn how to run particular analyses because people, which is another real genuine benefit of sharing your stuff, is that they can become instructive for others. I totally steal Luke's stuff, and yeah, Dan's things have taught me. I'm like, how do I run that analysis? I read it in one of Dan's papers, and he always shares the code, so I just go and look at the code and how he did it. Bam,
That's Which Dan you're talking about? Could you please put it in chat?
Dan Noble. He does a lot of cool meta-analyses and stuff. Well, he does heaps of cool stuff. But shout out to Dan. And he's got an incorrect, hilarious, I don't know. Oh, that used to be his photo there. Oh, they actually corrected it. He's down at ANU, or up, depending on where you are. That's Dan. It's just, you look on Scholar and he just always has data and code on all these bits and pieces. And I think he shares it all on GitHub mostly. Yeah, there are also some people, and it can be cool to stalk them. Thanks, Dan. He'll be nice and embarrassed by this. Well done. Oh, yeah, that was one we wrote a while ago. So we did this, that was one paper we did, and we did that whole thing just out in the open. I think we even saved the whole commit history. So you could follow this, which would be kind of embarrassing. We just did it out in the open, I think, from the start, just because, I don't know, we were lazy at the time anyway. But so it was a paper we wrote, and it should be kind of reproducible. But we even, so I tend to be, I don't have, I'm not shameless enough. I create a new repository when I'm sharing my data. So there's just like one commit, here's the final thing. But of course you can use GitHub to like continuously track your work. So, but I tend not to share that because I don't want to see everyone to see my dirty history of drafts and edits and everything, because no one needs to read that. I think we actually did for this one. So you can actually see every little change we made from 0 to publication. We added a README file, and then eventually, you know, it got published 6 months, you know, months later or whatever. Yeah, nice one. All right, we'll hook up this computer, and then I'll show you a bit of Zotero as well. I may have to stop sharing that for a tick. All right, it's blowing my mind. I didn't realize you could do that. I thought it kicked you off one of them. Oh, so I could actually, oh no, it did sign me out of the other one. All right. This is weird. Let me close this one. Okay. Oh, nice one. Thanks, Kate. The step-by-step. That's brilliant. Yeah, so I can show you just quickly what it looks like once you get it there. And I'm sure something equivalent would be doable. I'll just share my screen in EndNote, like that link that Kate shared. So this is Zotero. It just looks like a reference manager. So you just got tons and tons and tons of different references. It also manages PDFs, which is nice. So all my PDFs are all linked up in here. You just double click on those and there's some PDFs, cool. And they're all stashed tidily away on my computer, which is nice. I do like it. Ultimately, it does what I want it to. without too much fuss after a bit of setup. But yeah, so there's an option in here, like in Zotero, to basically, so that big Bibtex file that I showed you earlier, that's sitting buried, somewhere on my computer. So this master.bib file, that's just a file, and that contains the Bibtex format of every single one of these references, however many there are. I just set that up once at the very beginning. Like I think with Zotero, it's a matter of, what is it a matter of doing? No, because I did it once and I did it ages ago. So let me just quickly figure out. No. Oh, was it just something more like export library? I think I did. I want to export my library as a Bibtex file, and I just checked this little keep updated box. And so what that does is exports every single one of my references in full Bibtex format, but it also retains a little connection to that file, so that every time I add a new reference to my library, it updates that little text file. So that way, there's always just this text file sitting on my computer, master.bib, and that contains my whole reference library in Bibtex format. I never have to interact with it. I'm only working with Zotero, adding stuff in here and whatever, and that's great. And then at the beginning of my every one of my little manuscripts, I just need to make sure that it knows, well, that's where all my references live, in this master.bib file, wherever that happens to be on my computer. And so just every time I have a new paper, a new document, whatever, I just copy paste those over, copy paste, because it's always going to be in the same thing. And then when I'm actually writing, instead of memorizing 10,000 little keys or whatever, again, I suspect this would be possible with EndNote, but Zotero off in the background is already just given every single one of these things its own unique little citation key. So I can actually just hit, well, actually all I need to do is a keyboard shortcut. So I just hit copy on my keyboard, say I want, your chemical code tells me, so this one by, actually maybe we want, yeah, this one, okay, copy. Charles et al. 2015, I don't know what the key is, it doesn't matter because I just hit the copy button and then in my document I hit paste, that's the key for it. Great, I'll take your word for it. So I put a little @ symbol in front of it and it's easy as that. It's in. If I need to find a particular paper because I keep forgetting, I just use Zotero's search function. Sorry, I have to drag it out of the way of faces. John's things or cool, which one was it? 2115. Yep, that was the one I wanted. Great. Copy. I don't care what the key is. It doesn't matter to me. Paste. Done. And now that's in there as well. And that's just the workflow. So it's very similar to like insert reference in EndNote once it's set up and running. But maybe, yeah, I'm sure something will be possible in EndNote. Get out of here. But if you are looking for a new manager, I'd suggest it. It's the least worst of a whole terrible set of bits of software. And this one doesn't cost money as well, which is nice. And that you need those licenses and whatever.
So is Zotero free?
Yeah, it's free and it's open source and maintained by some very nice people. So it's all
cool, all
wide open, which is nice.
Yeah, EndNote's got better, but it's still really glitchy. So maybe I'll make the switch.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Yeah, sorry, go on.
I was going to say that I'm going to have to go because I've got a 1 o'clock, so I'm going to have to move for another meeting. But it's been fantastic. Thank you. I've learned.
Oh, cool. No, I'm glad to hear it. No worries. Nice. Thanks for coming along and nice to see you. And just email me with any questions or anything as they crop up, by all means.
Thank you. And thanks very much for organising. Thanks for taking the time to present, but thank you for organising, Julianne.
Thanks, Julianne. Yeah.
Thank you.
Have fun. Yeah, knitting like pros. Oops. Yeah, little tips and tricks. those are the big ones. There are fiddly little things, but you can just, a quick Google will help you fix them. Things like, by default, R Markdown puts all your references at the end of a document. And if it's a draft, maybe you want like your figures and tables after that. So you just need, there's a little trick to get that going, but which I can show you here is this little bit of code. It's an ugly little bit of HTML. If you Google it, it'll turn up. But yeah, by default, it'll just plonk everything down. The very last thing in your document will be your references. So you need to manually say, actually, no, I want them here instead. So I'll just highlight this for the recording if anyone reads it. But yeah, Google will also turn this trick up because everyone faces the same problem. Here's the slides. Yeah. Have you got a citation? Managed to get it into your fake little template yet? Slotting in okay, or any hiccups? So to do it manually, I guess, you know, just for the sake of this, without rearranging your whole library at this point, you just look something up. Nope, that's not what I wanted. I'm gonna, maybe that's what I wanted.
Tom, any tips for, I mean, it's probably impossible. I'm just thinking ahead. Yeah. If I've already written a chapter of my PhD, for example, in Microsoft Word, can you back reverse engineer it into Markdown? As in, I'm just thinking, if I need to put in every single reference again manually, that would be.
Yeah, that would be killer, wouldn't it? I do not know.
Okay. You probably haven't touched a Word document to write anything in many years.
No, I have. I mean, I do use them regularly because collaborators, right? I mean, and supervisors, and yeah, I still do a lot. I just I never really go backwards unless it's to to that magnitude, unless it's to copy in some comments or whatever, or some ideas. Yeah, I can only imagine it would be painful. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, no, I can also imagine that. I'm thinking of, someone mentioned earlier, references from the same year, and then figuring out which one of those is which keyword in reverse would be a fun task. But yeah, and then also just for every reference you've ever done.
Exactly. Yeah, I would just, you're copying and pasting over the text and then replacing every reference with its keyword to get, I don't think there'd be an easy way to do that. I don't think.
Okay. Because I'm not considering whether to do my thesis in Markdown after this 3-hour session, because it's definitely got advantages. And
updates things and whatnot, and you can always just spit out a document. It's easier to go that way. So if you're working in R Markdown, kind of easy enough to go to Word, send it to people.
Yeah.
And so you can get those benefits, but coming back is tricky. It's just good. It looks like people have done it. Yeah.
I also heard that there is one painful thing is when you write your thesis in R Markdown, because you have to fit the format required from the university, and not all the universities have that template available for R Markdown online.
Yeah, I would go into it assuming that at the very last step you'll have to convert it into Word anyway. Just like you say, because unis aren't, and journals still can't take these things really, right? So there's always that last step. But if you enjoy it for your own sanity and when you do your data analysis and everything,
I think it's mostly because Word just can't handle big files. So whenever you get past a certain word limit or certain things, it just crashes, and it's driving me insane.
I appreciate that. I would definitely be breaking it up into chapters, so
even that sometimes it's like you put a
notes.
I mean, that's what I've been doing so far, which is why I'm having written up 2 of my chapters, I'm now wondering whether it's worth reverse engineering them into Markdown to make it align with other ones, but maybe not.
I'm totally with you. No, I mean, I would be, yeah, I'd, because I like it, I'd be doing it. But yeah, I'd have, in terms of the R Markdown workflow, if I broke that up into chapters and you had an associated analysis file and that, I think that'd be a lovely way to do it. And it should just, you could just knit the whole thing together, and spit out a nice, pretty looking thing.
Yeah.
That's a good point that I didn't know Word couldn't handle large files. I should pay attention when it's my time to write my thesis.
Yeah,
it really grinds to a halt, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really starts, especially if you're like, if you're hooked up to like university, like OneDrives and things like that, then like it's uploading to the cloud, and then it hangs somewhere, and then you lose. I've just been through the ringer recently, so I'm just trying to find ways to avoid it. But then the sort of the counterpoint is that I then have to now go and learn Markdown properly if I'm going to do that. Like, where's my time better? I mean, my time is better spent learning Markdown for sure, but it might take the same amount of time for my skills in the end.
That's the eternal trade-off. And one other thing that we didn't touch on is if you do learn, if you're learning these skills, which are kind of data science skills, and Git and GitHub are great ones to learn, to put on the list. And R Markdown plays beautifully with Git, GitHub, but Word doesn't. Word can't play with it. So you can get all the benefits of version control that GitHub offers, which is that precise tracking of the snapshots. So as your project develops, you write an introduction, save a snapshot, write the methods, edit things. That kind of distribute that, which is what's called version control, and what Git and GitHub are for. Plays very well with our Markdown because it tracks individual lines, and so your full history of changes to your document, to your code, to your thesis, you can save it and preserve that history. But it doesn't play well with Word because they're just big binary blobs, so it can't see inside them. But for like if we look at some code base that we've worked on for years, you can go through the entire history of changes to this code base and look up every single line we've tweaked, and every change we've made. And if I screwed something up, I can roll back to history. And same with the thesis. I had an idea and I deleted it like 3 months ago, and I can just go back and find it, but it doesn't work so well with Word. Yeah, that would be another workshop unto itself. Apparently there are maybe ways. Redoc. I don't know. I think that'd probably be a bit janky. But it looks like maybe some people have kind of sort of gotten from Word back to R Markdown.
Yeah, just skim reading that first paragraph, I saw the words experimental and suspended. Please don't eat my thesis.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it should leave it alone, but it just may not work very well. Yeah. Yeah, I'd just be copying and pasting, I suppose.
I'll certainly give it some thought. I really appreciate this. Has been a really, really good series of workshops, and
cool.
They've all been really, really useful. So thank you so much, Tom, and again, thanks for the organizing.
No, it's been lovely to meet you all and lovely to chat. And yeah, if you hit snags and things, and if I've sent you down a rabbit hole and you're a month into your converting your thesis, cursing my name, feel free to just send me an email and I'll help you out of it as well. By all means, very happy to. Yeah, I mean, cool though. That's kind of it, I think. Happy to chat anytime, but otherwise, thanks for coming along and lovely to see you all, and well done. Easy stuff.